You're in the court.
Turned on the internet or something?
Thank you. We are 5 minutes late, so I'd like to get started. This is the regularly scheduled work session for the Oregon Community Commission for Tuesday, July 13th. And around the table we have
Daphne West, City Commissioner.
City Commissioner. Doug Gilly, Commission President.
James Casita, City Commissioner.
staff.
Ed Sullivan, City Attorney.
Thank you. You've been with us before.
Time or two.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
Fraser, City Manager.
Mary Bankhead, Assistant to the City Manager.
Tony Conklin, Community Development Director.
Nancy Croswell, Director of City Engineer.
Javier Luis.
Nancy I, City Recorder.
Community Service Director.
Maureen Cole, Oregon City Library.
Thank you. Begin with future agenda items. And I have wanted to ask if the commission is interested. I have met with Environment Oregon as one of the groups that's promoting the statewide plastic bag ban. And they're willing to bring a presentation to the commission if we would like to either be informed about it or consider taking a position on it if you're interested. Is there any interest in that? Okay. Right. Actually, it could be a work session or it could be just a presentation at the city commission meeting and whatever staff would like to do for tonight. Anything else? Commissioner Casita.
An executive session request. In the online version of the Oregon City News today, there is an article regarding a lawsuit that was filed against the city apparently back in April. I didn't know anything about it. I wanted to see if we could get a executive session just reviewing all of the litigation against the city and maybe even all the tort claim notices against the city that have not yet resulted in litigation. Just want to be apprised of what's going on in that area.
Did you need to do that all together, or did you wish to just do that privately with them?
It's up to the commission. I think it'd be good to have
You have the claim on now. I think we need to be apprised of more detail.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the current.
We will claim, but I don't think we have the background that.
I agree with that. That otherwise, I think that would be a conversation that I would think the commissioner could have with the attorney. Is that agree? Everybody agree with that? Okay. Is that it, Jim?
Yeah, I join Commissioner Neal's suggestion.
Which I haven't done.
Another suggestion? Okay, Doug?
Yeah, well, I think we have to revisit again the task force on code.
The who?
The code.
Habitat Task Force. Okay. Is there interested in that? Okay. All right. Yes.
I have a little question about that. If we were going to bring that to the commission at a work session, what do you want us to bring to as sort of the conversation?
Well, the conversation issue really, I think the major interest was in fact the dredging and what might be done in the future in terms of the dredging material.
Okay. I think there were two things. One was the dredging, the hydrology, and one was this habitat thing.
Well, I think
that's why I want to have clear clarification.
So
whether the dredging material can be used for habitat purposes.
Well, the topic, let's be clear about what the topic is. So staff knows, is the topic to form a committee to study, or is the topic how to expedite an answer, like how can dredging occur, or how can habitat?
When it came up, we decided that we were not going to put any of this onto the current development, and I think that was true. I think one of the triggers was the closing off of the code based on the sedimentation that happened there. And the long-term issue, I think it would be a long-term issue anyway, was in fact, are there ways we can utilize some of that material for habitat restoration? Or not only restoration, but habitat improvement.
Okay, so we have, the next question I have is, we have a Corps of Engineers permit for dredging. that takes care of those dredging spoils in the Willamette River, which is what they wanted. So this would be for future dredging?
That's the way it was intended initially. But you indicated our permit is good for how long?
It's, you have to just keep renewing it, but if we change the disposal location for the dredging material, we'd have to redo the permit.
Right, and the original intent was not
Not
to
to mess
affect
with
the
that.
current dredging permit, but it was in terms of future.
Okay, so again, what does the commission have in mind for us framing the conversation?
Yeah, what is the topic? Is it the result, or is it a committee?
Whether the material itself, and I think it requires a discussion of stakeholders, but whether the material itself, some of it could be used in the code for habitat enhancement.
So it's a topical question.
It's a topical question, it's not intended to affect the current dredging.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm only talking about process. Whether it's the formation of a committee, which is talking about the task force, or whether it's a topic, which is the dredging committee.
It's a topic, but the point is that there are stakeholders that would be involved.
At the work session, at which the
Well,
discussed.
I think the idea is to get this going. And also there was issues regarding the funding of such a task force, and we had that as part of the discussion.
Volunteerism versus paid positions, and
Yes.
that kind of a thing. So do you want us to get information from any of those agencies first, or do you just want us to bring in general for a short
I think
discussion
we
on
want to have a
direction?
discussion.
Short
Short discussion.
Okay, all right.
Well, it may not be that short.
Well, but sort of give us
Yeah.
direction.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Is that clear then?
Yes, that is clear, thank you.
Any others
Well, I'm gonna bring up another one.
for future?
Yes,
Okay.
we got almost $500,000 for the purchase of natural areas from Metro that had not been allocated or in fact specifically identified where they were going to be used. And we haven't had a discussion under the current commission about that at all.
The reprioritization for the new bond money?
I mean, we
What
may,
we expended. We have some still left?
oh yeah, we only expended the 500 something thousand, there's about $1 million, right?
900,000.
Yeah, so
I just don't remember the exact amount.
it's gonna be between 400 and 500,000.
I think you're pretty close to that, yeah. I just don't remember exactly.
So this is something that you want us to get started through PRAC, our advisory committee, so the recommendation then comes to us for discussion and hearing?
That's fine, but in fact, Prac looked at 2 sites or, before. We took a bus tour, you may recall. And I think probably the first discussion would probably be on those 2 areas. If other areas are suggested in the process, that's fine.
So are we okay then with PRAC making a recommendation to us? That's, okay. There may be some other things.
Well, first of all, I guess Prac making a recommendation. There were 3 sites that we looked at, okay?
It's a long time ago.
That was a long time ago.
Time ago, yeah.
But the question is, if Prax's gonna look at other things, this part that we bought is going to be minimal use for natural areas. From my standpoint, the intent of that bond issue, and Metro approved that, I had no issue with that. The intent of that was actually looking at natural areas and open spaces. We've already dedicated a good portion of that to potential recreational use. That area we're seeking to procure next to the high school, right?
Already purchased.
Yeah, well, that we and that, although there's perhaps some wetlands there, that was not the major function of that procurement. It's the recreational part. And from my standpoint, if we're going to give Prac direction, the direction should be that they're going to be looking at areas that are going to be used for natural areas for open spaces, which I think was the main intent of those monies anyway.
If I could just comment, Commissioner Neely, you're correct in that. However, I would just advise the commission that in follow-up conversations that I've had with Metro, and I know from the work that they're doing with that bond measure and the distribution of the money, they've given a lot of flexibilities to the local agencies.
I understand that.
I'm just telling you for your awareness. I'm not suggesting.
I'm aware of that. I know I'm aware of that. That was stated before, and that's why we were able to do what we were able to do. But my personal statement is directions would be given to PRAC to look at open space and natural areas as a primary use of that.
I understand what you're saying. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that the commission understood that Metro has indicated that they're being very liberal with allowing the communities, because it's local dollars, and they wanted to make sure that the communities were using them to however they wanted to use them. So just that's just an awareness.
I think we need then to have a little touch base here, because it would be my intent that PRAC, you look broad and holistically, and make a recommendation based on what they see and the needs of the community. Then when it gets to our level, we can have public input that they will also have and talk about that. But I hate to tie their hands to just that if there's some other pressing need that we don't know about.
More than half the monies have been used for a park for recreational purposes. You can express it however you want. Mr. Archer can express it that there's a division in the commission as to what the emphasis should be, but I'm going to state where my emphasis is.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I need to ask what direction. It's important we give direction to PRAC so that they know what they're studying. So
my suggestion is.
Excuse me, just a moment. I heard that. Yes, yours is on the table. So I'm just asking if others concur with that focus, or do we just want them to make a recommendation based on what they're able to see? I mean, do we want to narrow the focus, I guess is the question. I am not. Oh, Jim, who's first?
That was actually from my earlier.
Okay, let's take you off. Doug, you've already had yours. Daphne.
Commissioner Neely, I'm certainly not opposed to parkland being used for natural spaces. That would be a great idea, but I would like to look more broadly at this point and see what PRAC advises, also put it through a public process, and what do we need? So the needs of the community. So I'd like it to be a little bit broader discussion. I'm not ruling that out, but I'd like to start here, and then maybe we'll end up at natural spaces.
I think we likely will.
Both the others.
Yeah, no.
And
you guys wish to speak. Okay, Rocky.
I don't really know if this is prior to our time in terms of the park property that was purchased and the grant, so I'm not sure the history there, but I tend to lean towards Doug's argument, but I don't really know the background, so I'd kind of like to know that before I don't really know that I know enough of the background to make that call, but I kind of feel the same way if that's what the money generally was earmarked for. And
well, it is, as Scott said, the cities have discretion.
I heard.
So this is the discretionary discussion. So, Jim, what was your view on this one?
I actually had a question. Was the money this still in a bank account, $500,000?
It's so the way it works is we have an IGA with Metro. It's basically a reimbursement, and I'm reflecting a little bit more on the amounts now that I've had a moment to think about it. I think we did spend exactly $500,000 on the first purchase. I think we had something like our total distribution was $980,000. So you were right on the mark there. So that the remaining 400 and whatever exact $1,000 it is available to us to use when we're ready to use it. And I do want to add one thing to what I said earlier. The money, while they're giving us discretion, it is very specific. It's for acquisition, not development. But other than that, they've been pretty broad in their discretion. So it's not in our account. The money is in Metro's
It's
account.
dedicated by Metro,
But it is.
they still have the money.
Yeah, exactly. And we have until we have a number of years to spend on that.
I guess my follow-up question then would be, you've answered one of them. We can only use it for acquisition and not for planning, for example, park design or anything. It's just the acquisition, right? what have we purchased with it so far?
The one, we've made one purchase, and it was actually ranked as our number one priority, so we've acquired our top priority in that, and that was the high school area acquisition. That was the Glen Oak Road property that we bought on the corner of Glen Oak and High School Road.
Okay, so then the big purchase of the Kanema bus land was not part of this money.
That was
a good fund measure.
Okay,
right. So these bond measures, the one that was passed in '95, and then the one that passed again just recently, a few years ago. Metro has a number of different ways that they spread that around the region, and they have their own acquisitions that they do specific to targeted areas that they targeted when they gave their message to the voters to support the bond measure. So that was one of those. And then they also did a percentage of this recent one was a local share distribution that went to all the local park providing agencies. And that's the 900 and about 80,000 that we're talking about.
okay, so given that, it seems that what Commissioner Neely's requesting is just kind of restating what the purpose of the bond money is for. That you're focusing on new open areas, natural areas acquisition, which seems to be what the purpose of the funds is for. So I'm not sure then that we really have discretion to go beyond what Commissioner Neely's asking.
No, we don't.
Okay, so, and then,
Well, we don't have discretion to do that, but the stated purpose behind acquisition might be, though, I think that's what we're talking about. The stated purpose could be to put it into just open space and habitat areas, or it could be an acquisition to be developed into a recreational area at some future date.
Since this is the case, I would recommend that this is a point, which I was suggesting to begin with, for a study session.
Oh, before we send it off to France.
That's right. And that's what my recommendation actually was.
Before we send it to prep.
Yeah.
I'd agree with that.
So it appears that this is new enough that we maybe could review the background of the bond and the old priorities and look at where we've come.
And from my perspective, that would actually be very helpful for staff because we accomplished our number one target pretty quickly, and the rest of those, it would help me to revisit with the commission what direction and
Good idea.
And I do think probably after you've talked about that, I think it would be helpful to take that to CRAC and at least offer the opportunity for their input too. But that would be very helpful to staff. I appreciate that.
And that's good use of advisory committee, I think, too. Okay, anything else on future agenda items? So we have four new things to add. All right, we'll move to our discussion item. First one on the list is a new road connection by our South End Fire Station. This is a project of the United Methodist Church of Oregon City. I have to state that I am a member of the church. However, and actually, if it were a vote, I would likely have to recuse myself since I am an investor. But since we're not making a decision this evening, if no one has a problem with that, I will stay through that. Is there anyone that has an issue with me hearing this? Okay. Then we will move on. Who is the staff who's making this report? Tony.
Thank you. So as you did state, the Oregon City United Methodist Church, we've been working with them to try and come up with an alternative for a road location. We went through a minor partition and zone change process, and it required Josephine Street to be extended through the site, and originally it was going to extend just north of the fire station and south of the church, connecting to South End Road. At the time we did that partition, we had owned the property. We were working with Chief Harris to acquire some property and work out some parking arrangements and then be able to make that connection through. Since that time, Clackamas Fire District has taken over that fire station, and they would like to see an alternative to what was approved as part of that partition for the location of that street. Working with the applicant and the fire district, one alternative identified was to create the connection to the west or behind the fire station and connect over through a park that was dedicated as part of the Oak Tree Park subdivision in the early 70s. I think what this really comes down to is an interpretation of under Chapter 10 of our charter, sections 41, 42, 43, and it deals with what's the designated city park. And section 41 of the charter only applies to designated city parks, while section 43 discusses creation of additional parks through dedication, but allows the city to designate by ordinance real property acquired through other means. One view would be that the charter would be that only parks that have been designated as a park by specific ordinance of the commission are subject to the limitations in section 41. The alternative view would be that property dedicated as parkland is subject to the limitations of section 41 because the language discussing designation of parks applies only to parks acquired by means other than dedication or gift. So we have in our charter identified parks that are called out, and those are designated parks. We go into a next section of the charter that talks about if we receive a park through dedication or gift. And then there's another section that talks about we can dedicate parks that we acquire that are real property. And so the question is, if you dedicate a park, is it automatically a designated park? Or does that dedicated park need to be adopted by ordinance to become a dedicated park? And what that limits is that if it's a designated park, it needs to go to the voters for approval for any development on the site. And the way our code is written, a road would be considered development. And I think that once we have some direction on the interpretation of the charter, that would then start to identify what options we have to accommodate, if at all, a road across this property. Then I guess the second question is if the city commission's even willing to entertain, if they decided this is a dedicated park, putting that question on the ballot for the voters. We also have the representatives from the church here tonight, if you'd like to hear from them, and we would be happy to answer any questions you may have. We also have the city attorney here to help with kind of some of the discussions around the charter. And
I do have a question. So when we get to our decision-making mode at the city council meeting, what is it we that have to vote to interpret the charter then? That will be a decision of the city commission?
You have quite a bit of latitude in the interpretation of the charter. That is correct.
So tonight's purpose would be really to explore that, or because that's really the more important issue than the viability of the project itself? Are they quite interrelated?
They're interrelated, but we need to understand what the interpretation of the charter is at the commission level to even be able to understand what process we have to go forward with and to make those decisions and then bring those back in order to even consider putting a road across the park piece.
Commissioners who wish to hear from the church and the project representative before we talk about the charter, you want to talk about the charter first?
And I'd like to hear a little bit from Clackamas Fire.
Okay.
Because I would like to be, my memory refreshed. I think we owned the land there, that we sold them the station, but we had the land, but apparently we don't own either.
No, we're talking about if you go to the map under documents,
Right.
if you see the map, you can see the city-owned property here.
But, well, I want to hear why they changed their mind on the road and
Okay.
where it was, and that's what is there an ownership issue there, or?
You want to have a question before the discussion begins? Why don't you come forward and have our attorney? Okay, Doug?
Yeah, the question to the attorney is the issue of, as I understand it, designated versus ordinance. Is that correct? I was here for that designation, and I guess, from my standpoint, it's a question of when that was designated, how did the council perceive the park?
If I understand it correctly, it was at about 1976 that this plat was adopted. The charter was amended in 1970, so it followed the adoption of sections 40, et cetera. So there is an argument, and a decent argument, that the adoption or the adoption of the plat, which included the dedication, may well be designation.
Do you have more questions? Okay, please introduce yourselves and then, this is a work session, so we're more informal here.
Let me do one other thing, if I may. This may wind up as a land use case, and if that happens, the testimony here is going to be made part of that proceeding, just so there's no ex-party issue. You all be involved in that case. Some of you may or may not be on the commission at the time it comes up, but I want to make sure that everybody knows that this may well become part of a later case.
Okay, so noted. All right, thank you. Welcome.
My name's Tom Sissel, I'm an engineer. This is Martha Rickliff with the church. And basically, we wish to hopefully come to some sort of decision that allows the church to proceed. The church is only going to request a partition when this comes back before you, as they did the first time. The decision of where the street goes, what it must cross, is actually a part of a future subdivision request. And the church's intent would be to sell the parcel to a future developer who would make that request at a later date. But the key to where this alignment goes for this road is key to how the partition is configured to allow for that future development. I'll just note that as we move forward, this process has been difficult from the beginning because the city wishes Josephine to extend through. Our first request was simply the cul-de-sac behind the church, and if we get through discussing here this evening and you think that's a good idea, please we express that. But the intent, is to come up with something that allows the church to move forward. And the thing that's kind of pushing it time-wise is the previous partition approval expires with this last extension on February 8th. We need to have something into the city prior to that date that addresses the modification, and we would like to have some certainty, as best can be established, that the path to move forward on will have a likely chance of being approved by the city. And that's kind of where we're at this point.
Okay. Any questions? Okay, thank you. All right, what else do you need to know, Commissioners? Oh, did you wish to speak, Martha?
Basically, what we've been trying to do is just divide the parcel so that we can sell it off. The street becomes the issue for us. There is no connection. We've never been able to utilize Josephine as access to our property, which limits any development by the church into that back portion. Anything we would build would require additional parking, which requires a second exit, and we don't have Josephine, we can't exit. So for us, it becomes useless property, and so the intent is to sell. And we are in cooperation with the Clackamas Fire District now on a proposed plan that would be a street acceptable to them. The deputy chief is here if you wish to hear from him on this issue. But since Harlow has been realigned to go to Lafayette, and future down the road they are anticipating a stoplight there, putting the road that was originally granted to us on the north side of the fire station, south side of the church, impacts the fire station if there is a stoplight there. And so that becomes why we are seeking the change of location of this street. Without that change, like Tom said, we kind of go back to the cul-de-sac situation to try to access that property because there is no other exit.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
Oh, okay, Daphne?
As staff, so is a cul-de-sac at the end of Josephine a legal and feasible option?
I think we need to be careful in terms of what we're going to talk about because we've already done a partition and we've reviewed the property and they didn't meet the criteria for a cul-de-sac and we did determine that connectivity was needed to alleviate some of the transportation impacts. I would caution this commission against making a decision tonight and telling the applicant to go build a cul-de-sac. I will just say that we have reviewed this, we have a decision. As part of that decision, they were required to connect to South End Road, and that decision was not appealed.
You've got to change the decision on a new application if you're going to get from here to there. And you've got to deal with your connectivity policy when you take that up.
I would stress, let's not get mired in the details of a land use decision. We're trying to address the charter and the interpretation of if a dedicated park needs to go in front of the voters in order to do any development on it. I would really caution against designing a partition at this point. We are well far away from that.
So we have a presentation for understanding of the purpose of the application, and so thank you, appreciate that. And then we need to take up the charter. However, since the fire department has sent representatives this evening, with our battalion chief, Jamie Karn, you need to, we can't hear you, unfortunately, unless you come up to the microphone. Okay. That's a good delegation of authority.
He's been doing that all day. I'm Brian Rooney. I'm the captain at the South End Fire Station. And we reviewed the plans and we are in agreement with them. I don't know, I'm not quite following what you're saying on the history and everything, but the road would take how we enter to the fire station from the rear. So I don't know that it really interferes with the park or anything. It allows us plenty of room and creates an ideal situation for a community fire station with the cul-de-sac or a road going through behind. So
okay.
Yes, so we are in agreement with it and we've worked with the church and so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, now back to the issues of the charter. Rocky. Is it or for you?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I have a little better thought about what I think on it now with the explanation for the fire department because but the main issue is the park. And as far as the park's concerned, if the maps for the city and this map that's included in our packet from 1985 or prior say right on it, park area, you have the designated park. You know, I can't imagine trying to start deciding which parks are designated, what parks are not. If it's called such and such park and it's labeled down on the map, it's a designated park to me. And I think that's a real problem. I mean, I think if I wouldn't be against sending that to the voters too, and if the fire department's supportive of this, then I would assume that the voters would understand that. But I was I've never seen a crazier road in my life. I was right up there with Lombard from San Francisco. It's just, but I understand the traffic light, if there's a traffic light there and the problems with people stopping and in front of the fire station and stuff like that. But I guess the real issue is the park, and I don't know how to resolve that other than it's a park. And I don't think there's any way to cut corners around that.
Jim,
Yeah, thank you. Looking at this question, I'm reminded of our discussion about, we had a couple weeks ago about leasing out the end of the trail in the Critic Center. And my opinion back then was, I think informs what I think about this tonight, that when the voters passed that charter provision requiring, a vote on issues of transferring land and leasing land, et cetera, I really am reluctant to have the commission kind of make really creative interpretations in order to avoid putting questions like this to the voters, because that's precisely why the voters passed the charter provision. So, and particularly what the city attorney just said about this, I think I'd agree with Commissioner Smith that just from a common sense, straightforward reading of the language and what the plat says, I would tend to agree that this would be dedicated parkland that would require a vote.
Doug?
Well, this is the third person to agree with that particular statement. I would say getting it before the vote of people would be very time sensitive to what you just said and what your deadlines are. So if the commission was going to, if the commission is going to act on this in any way, my preference would be to take it to a vote of the people, but I think we could be under a very tight timeline in order to do it.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because we were thinking of we don't have enough business for the next city commission meeting, so we're thinking of holding that over. And I believe the deadline for putting issues on the ballot is early August. Do you know what the date is? Can you research that from there? Thank you. We may move that later, but that's would be problematic for the November ballot.
It's impossible to do it.
Physically?
It's feasible, but you have enough time to formulate a ballot title and go through that process for the November election.
Well, we may not if you don't have if we don't have a second July meeting. That's what I'm saying. That's and when is the first meeting in August? That's maybe. I think it might be the 6th. Might be the deadline, but if you can find out. Yeah.
It's actually September, early September.
It's a 60 day, not a 90 day.
Measured to the county.
Oh, I thought it was earlier. It's 60 days from November. Okay, so we do have time. Okay. All right. Well, that then I guess needs to come back to us at the first meeting in August. Any other issues with that, David?
Mayor, one thing that's going to come up is going to be who pays for the ballot title in the process. And so you have to decide that tonight. I just wanted to plant that so you could be thinking about it, and maybe the applicant and anybody else who would be interested in funding it can think about it.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm not trying to make any decisions or anything, but I think that what would be an additional sell to the people who decide to put it on the ballot would be, is there any kind of trade-off in land that would make up the loss of the area as a park?
Okay. Any other comments on this?
Yeah, one more question regarding process of fall elections and ballot measures. Does the cost change depending on whether you put one question on the ballot or 5 questions on the ballot, or is it's all the same?
Well, no, it's different depending on who the jurisdiction. So, for instance, if 6 jurisdictions in a county put something on, the cost of the election is divided by 6. If one jurisdiction puts something on, that one jurisdiction pays the total cost.
No, that's what it is.
No, I know.
Oregon City has one jurisdiction.
Yeah, you know the total.
But if we put 5 questions or 2 questions on the ballot, is it the same cost to us per question? Is it a per question?
Yes.
Or is it just
Per jurisdiction.
per jurisdiction?
But it's really not a yes and no answer. It's the same cost for the election component, but the ballot title and all the staff, the legal review, the staff time that goes into it is of course exemplified by however many questions you have and how complicated they are.
The preparation time, yes. Okay,
And that deadline is September 2nd.
September 2nd, okay. Good. I'm glad it's later. Any other questions, Ms. Tony?
So we'll bring that back to try and get that at the next city commission hearing in August, the first one in August, and we'll be bringing that back as a question of if you would like to put that onto the ballot. Is that my understanding? Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is the Regional Wastewater Advisory Committee issues. Nancy Brasher, are you take the lead on that? This is the letter that we shared with you at the last City Council and City Commission meeting. And other related issues, especially the proposal that Jim made at the last meeting about
Yes,
the
thank
independent
you.
district.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Good evening, Commissioners. I believe at your last meeting, or the one where I wasn't here, we were asked by the Regional Wastewater Advisory Committee to have the mayor bring this letter to her colleagues to make sure that everyone was on board with moving forward with these particular questions and developing answers for the preliminary policy and operational recommendations. And I don't believe that the commission took a stand on that. So we would like to do that if possible. And if you need to say it before your actual meeting, that's fine. I think the mayor really just needs to get head nods. It's not a formal action. And then I believe at the last meeting then that Commissioner Nasita, you requested some discussion about the governance of Tri-City, thinking that perhaps it should be locally controlled, at least to discuss the potential of locally controlled service district, something like Oak Lodge, bring it more to a grassroots democratic kind of management of Tri-City. And we asked the city attorney's office to provide a memo on the Tri-City governance, which you do have at your in your
This one?
Yes.
The
and
bulleted
yes.
one?
Yes.
This is Tri-City governance at the top.
Right. And so what that essentially says is that based on the statutes, this particular service district is to be governed by the county commissioners. And there are ways for the city to have more, have a little more authority, and that would take Board of County Commissioners action to, for example, give more credence or pay more attention to the advisory committee's recommendations, have them play a bigger role in Board of County Commissioners' decisions, and or else to sign an IGA where you would they would delegate that authority to another entity. Then there's another approach, which would be dissolution of Tri-City Service District, and that would be a much larger effort. It would require a vote of the citizens, and it would be, as noted in the bullets, it would mean you'd have to be able to take over the operation of the district, and it's a fairly sophisticated operation at this time. We would have to look at the liability for the existing bonds that Tri-City holds, and then, which I don't think there are a whole lot out there right now, Clackamas County Service District number 1 does have a significant bond indebtedness now, and then we may require review by the Metro Boundary Commission. So there are still some questions, and I wanted to just
the Metro Boundary Commission?
I believe so.
I thought that was dissolved.
You don't, there is something in place for major boundary issues that Metro has. It's not used an awful lot. If you remember when we had the kerfuffle with the water district, that committee was involved.
Okay. May I ask another question also on that? That kind of dissolution requires the vote of the citizens of what?
All three.
jurisdictions?
Not the
Or the
county as a
county?
whole. Sorry? Or the county as a
It's
whole.
the county, isn't it? The county owns
That's
it.
actually the area that is within the district,
Within the
Area
district.
within
the service district.
And I wanted to just,
well, it's not the service district. Oh,
Is it county service?
I actually have the boundaries in a drawing here.
Is it chapter 451 county services?
Oh, okay.
Yes.
It's like
So, in that last, in that last. I think this is.
Doesn't seem memo that you just did.
The boundary, Madam Mayor, the boundaries approximate the boundaries of Western, Westland, and Oregon.
Okay, thank you.
So this dissolution option, if the voters within the Tri-City Service District opted to dissolve Tri-City as a district by a vote, they could do so whether or not the Board of County Commissioners objects or not?
Yeah, and the big issue there is going to be bonds. Because if there's an outstanding bond and indebtedness, that has to be part of the dissolution plan. And then you have the Board of Commissioners acting as the governing body of that district, and there are other county service districts that relate to this. Before the vote was taken, there were financial arrangements made by the same governing body of the two districts. It could complicate any dissolution.
And there are, in an IGA, there's some financial relationships.
Absolutely.
Right now, who are those between?
It's between it's between all three cities and the Board of County Commissioners, the IGA is.
The IGA is, but the county commissioners act as a governing body of all county service districts. So if there are arrangements between county service districts, on the one hand, the Board of Commissioners can make it for the one service district and on the other.
So you mean the arrangements between CCSD?
Yeah, I remember seeing one such IGA about a year ago that had the same Board of County Commissioner signature for both CCSD and for Tri-City.
That's correct.
Right.
So there's at least one existing
That's
IGA
correct.
between.
And I believe that's the only one I know of. So, but I wanted to just review a little bit of the history, to probably kick off a little discussion and give us kind of what is the status of the district at this time. There was originally Tri-City Service District really just served the three cities, and at one point, the Clackamas County Service District 1, which is to the north of us, was getting a little short on treatment capacity at Kellogg. And so a diversion agreement was established between the two districts, and CCSD number 1 essentially paid us to treat some of their wastewater. And then the conditions at Kellogg have gotten, as the district, as CCSD has continued to grow, Kellogg has continued to get further and further behind on their treatment capacity. So there was, over the last 5 years, there have been numerous approaches to how are we going to handle wastewater in the county in the future. And it's taken a lot of work amongst all of the jurisdictions to essentially change the way we were doing business. No longer was it going to be CCSD was treating all their sewage at Kellogg, and Tri-City was treating all ours at Tri-City with a little diversion. Instead, it was decided because Tri-City had excess capacity now, and we also had the land and the ability to expand our outfall flows to the point where we could take a lot more flows from Clackamas County Service District number 1 at the Tri-City plant and expand that. And essentially, we're treating almost as much we will be treating almost as much CCSD number 1 flow at the plant as Tri-City flow at the plant at the completion of the expansion that's taking place today. So we went from a number of different advisory committees to a committee that the county established in agreement with all of the cities and all of the entities within this new committee, which is called the Regional Wastewater Treatment Advisory Committee. And it has been endorsed by Happy Valley, Oregon City, CCSD number 1 Advisory Board, City of Damascus, City of Gladstone, City of West Lynn. So at this point, all of these entities have kind of come together and have chosen to move forward as one body, at least in terms of an advisory committee to the Board of County Commissioners. And about $120 million of investment for Clackamas County Service District Number 1 is being made at the Tri-City plant. So we're in a very different kind of situation than we were 5 or 10 years ago, when we were very exclusive in our who served with the plant. So with that in mind, have at it. I just wanted to let you know, we really have changed the way we're doing wastewater treatment. I think we are approaching it from a more regional standpoint in terms of the facilities right now. How the governance works is a matter for elected officials to work out.
I have a question for the attorney too. I know that before the wastewater advisory committee was established, former Mayor Patty Galley had asked the same question of, I believe their attorney was Tim Ramos, but I believe sent back a memo that said that the form a special district, but the assets wouldn't follow.
I haven't seen that memo. I'd be glad to take a look at it.
I know that we had it at one time. I don't think I did.
Okay. You know that the
I haven't seen that. Sorry. No, I haven't seen it.
The assets of the district, of course, would, upon dissolution, net of any bonded indebtedness, would go back.
To the county?
Well, probably county assets, because the city, when it formed, this is way before my time even, gave in the various sewage treatment plants.
Yeah.
And so it is probably a county asset now.
I believe that was the startling piece to me of that. Okay, Doug.
Sure. On the memo we have here, the one we have here, it makes a statement that CCSD number 1 Tri-Cities have achieved treatment capacity parity. I presume that's because we're actually treating some of CCSD's wastewater.
No, we haven't treated.
Is this in the letter from Chair Peterson?
It's on the third paragraph, first sentence.
Yeah.
They're saying we've reached parity, and we are treating CCSD's some of its wastewater, so I presume that's why we're at parity.
I think I wouldn't want to comment on that sentence. That's interpretation.
Okay, well, that's the point. I got a letter here, and I just wonder what that means. Because parity is a very important word to them in terms of expansion and everything else. And I want to know, let's say we're at parity, and I want to know what that means.
So that would be a good thing for perhaps the mayor to take back to the committee.
Yes, I was struck by that sentence as well. Mm-hmm. Because I thought that we were needing treatment parity a little bit more in the future.
That's what I thought.
I think that's what we had discussed here. And then the second sentence, this means our 2 districts will add additional treatment capacity about the same time in the future, which I think is true, but I don't think we've reached it now. Other questions? Okay.
I have a couple of things. Just to go back to the city attorney. You indicated earlier that this dissolution option at the bottom would not require the assent of the Board of County Commissioners. So theoretically then, if the citizens really wanted to be grassroots and exercise local control, they could theoretically, this is a theoretical legal matter, vote to dissolve Tri-City and either simultaneously or shortly after vote to establish an alternative governing structure such as something like Oak Lodge, where people are directly elected to the Board of
But it may not be the same bodies that do this. It could be that the district, the CSD, the County Service District, is dissolved, and in order the city decides to set up its own district, or decides to take this as a city function.
Right. But the three cities that's one of the alternatives that
The
is.
three cities could make an intergovernmental agreement to do the same thing that the Kansas Services Bank is doing.
And, but the asset question complicates that.
And the bond question is infinitely more complicated because you've got two districts undertaking treatment, and how the financial arrangements are made would complicate the dissolution of a district if the debt is weighted on one of the two districts overly.
Okay.
And it is possible before the dissolution vote occurred for arrangements to be made to make it more difficult.
Sure. Okay.
And I do know that there are that CCSD holds $38 million worth of bonds now for this expansion that's taking place at Tri-City.
Okay. So that leads to my next question for Nancy, which was this expansion that's going on now of the Tri-Cities plant. Because of the CCSD bonds, are they becoming a part owner of the plant, or is it still completely owned by?
It's covered in the IGA, and I believe it's still owned by Tri-City Service District, but there's an ownership in the plant facilities that are CCSD's because they just spent $120 million building them.
I believe is how when we looked at how the assets were going to be looked at in the future, we used percentages of the use of the plants.
Right, capacity.
So I assume that was the
right.
same different.
And because there was some redundancy in some of the plants being used by those new improvements, I mean, it's all mixed together. There was a lump sum payment of, I believe, $5 million that was going to Tri-City to pay for that overlapping use of the Tri-City facilities.
I have some more comments to make, but I want to give others an opportunity to ask questions if they want to.
Why don't you just go ahead and
Okay, so let me move the scenario forward then, because I have a good sense, and thank you, all of you, for researching this. This is very good information. I mean, assuming that just from a political matter and a financial matter that trying to become independent of the county is too big of a hurdle to surmount. Then the second scenario I want to discuss relates to protection of our ratepayers, et cetera, and exercising what local control we have. You mentioned that we voted to join this wastewater treatment advisory committee, and that's true, but it was also a 3-2 vote like many of our votes were last year. And I was not in favor of it. And part of the concerns that I had came from discussions I had with citizens out of a concern that, I mean, and I certainly acknowledge there are advantages to economies of scale, et cetera. But there was some discussion that I saw in a number of emails that the Wastewater Advisory Committee was kind of a precursor to actual consolidation of CCSD and Tri-Cities into one kind of super agency by the Board of County Commissioners. And that process was going to kind of lead on this parity question, because Tri-Cities rates were lower than CCSD because they had a lot of issues, in other areas that you've mentioned, that in all of this parity, that Tri-City ratepayers, our rates were going to go up disproportionately in all of this parity process to pay for things like infrastructure in high growth areas up in, say, Damascus or Happy Valley, et cetera. One gentleman I know, he actually sent some emails around kind of like with charts and kind of documenting the likelihood that our rates were going to go up because of this. And I'm just wondering, and maybe this is a question too for the city attorney, is is there any means for us to protecting ourselves from that? Or is it because the Board of County Commissioners kind of calls the shots on this, that they are perfectly free to, in their rate structures,
really kind of sock it to the Tri-Cities ratepayers and raise our rates disproportionately to reach parity with the folks in the CCSD number 1 district who right now have been paying, higher rates. I mean,
long question and maybe a comparatively short answer. If the Board of Commissioners as the governing body of either or both districts stays within the law, and the law is fairly broad here, they are able to charge rates that Oregon City residents may not find to be happy.
May I respond to that? We spent hours and hours and hours and hours in meetings and negotiations, and when we had our joint meeting with Westland and Gladstone, we talked about this, and before Oregon City agreed to join the precursor committee where we battled over what parity meant and looked at the charts, and after what our 3 cities had determined is that we should have an independent analyst look at at those numbers, but at the end we didn't ever do that, which I still think was a good idea. But at the end of the day, what we set down on paper, of course it can be changed, but it was a pretty solid agreement that the bottom line for our negotiations were the Oregon City ratepayers would be protected, and that's where the analysis of the numbers came in, because I think we finally, all 3 districts came to the conclusion that, out there, when treatment parity was reached, and then our rates would only go up with the growth that happened here. It could be concurrently to the growth that happened there, but our rates would never be disproportionate to our growth. So whether that's still true, I think although it can be changed now, the county has to go through the wastewater committee, which is only an advisory committee, but we have all of those agreements in place, and it was all very, very public, and maybe I wouldn't be adverse again to have an outside consultant. Again, we'd have to pay for a financial consultant that the 3 communities might be willing to have a look at that. But I think now we're sort of locked into those charts and numbers that we so laboriously and painfully put together with all those hearings and meetings we had. So, Nancy, you want to comment on that too?
Yes, that was something that that was their most important thing for Tri-City, was to make sure that our ratepayers were protected. And the way I recall it is that, in fact, Tri-City will actually benefit with less of a rate increase over the next 20 years because of the plant expansion, and that all of the growth of the plant that's in this phase 1, well, actually it's a 4-phase thing, is being paid for by CCSD number 1. Tri-City isn't paying for any of it, and we will get some, we get some sharing from it. But, and then the other thing, Mr. Sullivan, you can help me with this too, but my understanding that for growth, you would be using existing development charges to be paying for that, and that would not be something you should be charging to the ratepayers, unless the governing board so chose.
My only point is that the power lies within the Board of County Commissioners to set rates. We may have understandings, but at the end of the day, it's them who do the rate setting.
Yeah. I totally agree. We do have some public relations and political power against that because of the battle we've gone through together. So, yeah, whether that's a paper tiger, I guess time will tell. But it was a pretty laborious agreement.
And it was so important to reach a conclusion, and not just for Tri-City, but for our fellow citizens in the rest of Clackamas County to find an answer to this wastewater treatment problem that we have. And it's important to have reached this point. I think that's important to know for the environment and for the folks in Milwaukee that live with Kellogg, and it's overflowing and we're having problems in the river, et cetera. So it's very important for the county to continue to have a good solution for treating wastewater for the entire county.
Sign up. Well, actually, I'm gonna let Doug go first because he signed up, and then.
I thought you were finishing. I thought you could finish and then we'd move on.
Okay. Well, it may take a little time. I just want to ask the mayor. I don't know what you're referring to in all of these Tri-City meetings you're talking about.
We remember we had the what was it called? No, it was you're talking about the location meeting.
You were just mentioning how the Tri-Cities communities came together to strategize on something.
You did. The three city councils met together. We met together in a work session at West Lynn. And
the IGA was signed by the county in late 2008. I wonder if Commissioner Nacita, that preceded your.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to clarify. Is when did these meetings take place?
Yeah, these were while we were in the negotiation period before we agreed to sign off the wastewater department. And then there was I don't know, did we have over a year of meetings, I think, prior to
I think there were actually a few more years. We were on one path, and then we had we step back. So there was folks that felt like they hadn't been brought along in CCSD number 1, so the county stepped back and tried to make sure everyone was talking and could reach some consensus on the issues.
I believe there was a lawsuit involved in there and some other things. It was a very, very circuitous process and complex to get to where we are today.
Thank
you. More. Okay, Doug.
Yeah, I want to emphasize to the mayor that when she has these discussions, the sense of the commission is this: the Tri-Cities capacity is the capacity that we provide to Tri-City ratepayers. It is not the capacity that we supply to CCSD users.
Correct.
It's got to be clear. Because the way I interpret this, and the only way I can interpret this that we've achieved it, is that they're attributing the Clackamas County Service District 1's users to our capacity, and that should not be the case. It must be clear. Because otherwise, I think we're going to see those rates come into place much, much earlier than any capacity, reasonable capacity piece needs to occur.
Yeah, good point. I totally agree with you because that's a very important point.
And if you wanted to just the plant before the expansion had a capacity of 38,000 homes per day, and we at that time were using 28,000 EUs.
So it's sort of definitely we had.
Right. No, I understand that, but we are providing to CCSD users, right?
Well, they built a whole bunch of capacity for themselves at our plant.
At our plant, and that cannot be counted to the parity issue.
No, I agree with you.
No, I'll definitely follow up on that. Sorry, I understand the sense of the council. No one needs to do something there. Yeah. Okay. Other questions on this one? Okay, we'll get back to you with some other answers. Next on the agenda is a discussion of the Carnegie Task Force recommendations. So, Ms. Scott Archer.
Yes, I'll introduce this and then turn it over. While I'm introducing this, I'll call up Elaine Kogan and Brian Watt to come to the speaker's table because they'll be doing most of the talking here in a little bit. But just to give you a background and a kind of a brief review of where we're at. Commission, as you know, you previously directed staff to go forth in engaging into a public process to review and basically make a determination and a recommendation of the future use of the Carnegie Center. Of course, we know that has temporarily been kind of displaced time-wise. However, this is still the work of this of the consultant and the task force is still very important because the library is only going to be there temporarily. And
Is that true, Mo?
in a year or whatever the time exactly is, we'll be faced with the same situation, which is a vacant public facility, and that's of course the purpose of why the city engaged in this. So to that end, last year the city did an RFP and ended up selecting Kogan owns Kogan, and Elaine Kogan, principal of that company, is here tonight. She was our principal consultant. She was retained to help us consult on the public process, to help work with the task force, and just to generally to help us work through that process. That's public engagement is what Elaine's company specializes in. Last year, a citizens task force was formed to basically be the group that really helped to formulate this recommendation that's here tonight. And the folks, I'd like to mention the people just to give them credit for serving and giving their time. A few of them are here tonight, some are not. First of all, the person sitting right in front of me here is Brian Watt. Brian is one of those task force members. Also on the committee were Wendell Baskin, Chuck Clemens, Rolla Harding, I believe Rolla's back there, Damon Mabey, Carol Pauley, Delta Powell, Brian Powell, Darren Smith, Cheryl Snow, Linda Van Haverbeek, Linda's here, Brian Watt I already mentioned, and Marcia Wimmer is over here tonight as well. And so those that was the 12 members of our citizens task force, and that group with the consultant met a total of 4 times. They had 4 task force meetings over the course of basically since last November. Also, an open house was held on February 6th. It was very well attended. And then additionally, an online survey was put up on our website for some bit of time, and it was very well responded to. I'm told by Elaine that it was a pretty high response for what they typically receive. So those were the processes by which the consultant and the task force and then staff, we basically were there to assist and facilitate, did the public outreach. And there was a lot of discussion, a lot of breaking down of and analyzing of the data that was received and all the different forms of public input, and which is what Elaine's company did. But I know that you've received the report. We sent that out to you, and I would at this time turn it over to Brian Watt, who I believe is going to speak on behalf of the task force and give you kind of a summary of what that group did and what their report is to you. And also, again, Elaine is available to assist in that and also to answer questions. So with that, Brian?
Okay, Brian, did you volunteer for this?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Thank you,
Commissioners, and everyone else. Good night to be in Oregon City. It's a great night tonight. It's my pleasure really to be the representative to bring this news to you. As you know, I think you may remember I've grown up in Oregon City, been an Oregon resident all my life. Disappeared for 20 years after joining the Air Force, and I'm back. I'm happy to be back, but I did learn how to read in the Carnegie Center when it was a library, partly, I guess I could say, downstairs as a little guy. So I guess I say that to also say that I think the 11 that were gathered at the table really brought a good representative view of what the Carnegie Center ought to look like. Mine was, it used to be a library, but of course, I was open to a lot of ideas, and I also had other ideas in my mind. But I think I found, as the process continued through the meetings and open house and the survey, that the 11 that we had there at the table were also well representative of what we found out from the community, what we found out through the survey and the open house. So that is my feeling sitting at the table. So I think I should pass that on to you. The members also, I thought, were very informed in their own disciplines, but also in general. And there were times where I thought kind of puny, when I didn't know what they were really talking about, but there were other times when I felt very confident because I knew what I was talking about or what the group was. But there was a lot of expertise at the table, and I hadn't drilled down so far in culture or things like that, for instance, where others were very well versed in that. And I guess one of the other things before I make a statement of our recommendation is that one of the questions that came up were, well, what are the other Carnegie Centers that are currently in Oregon doing? I mean, where are they? There were 4 that we investigated. I'll say the staff and Kogan owns Kogan investigated that came to the fore also in your report in Baker City, the Dalles, LeGrand, and also Pendleton. All of those are run by nonprofit organizations. They were libraries up until the mid-90s and early 2000s, and now they're run, like I said, by nonprofits. And they are essentially arts, culture, history, that type of thing. And I think you are probably informed on that somehow, but it is in your draft, or it is in your report. One of the other things that we operated under were criteria. I remember 3 of them quite clearly. One was that we maintain that facility sort of as is, and it's a historical icon that it is. Another is that we meet a need that's not currently met in the city of Oregon City. That was another criteria that we were thinking about and talking about as we were having our discussions. And one of the other big criteria that came up constantly was the economic viability of what we would present to you this evening. Now, having said that, I'll go ahead and read the recommendation from the task force, and also I'll be reading, I think it's on page 10, some of the next steps that we recommend. After considering the results of our extensive public outreach, the potential benefits to our city, the citizens, and the business community, as well as how to minimize the cost to the taxpayers, our task force recommends the following: that the city make plans for the future, for the Carnegie Center's eventual reuse as a multi-use arts and cultural center. Further, that the city takes steps to develop an ongoing partnership to create a city nonprofit hybrid organization to operate and maintain this multi-use Oregon City Arts and Culture Carnegie Center. We realize and we discussed that this will take time and commitment, but now that the library has been relocated, as Scott said, to the center temporarily, we have several months, maybe up to 18 months, to explore the alternative that we are suggesting. And during that time, we suggest you and others investigate the following factors, and those factors are on the next steps on page 10 of your report, I believe. And I'll just read through those quickly. Number 1, that you investigate the existence of one or more local nonprofit organizations that currently exist with the interest and capacity to move into the Carnegie Center. 2, that you investigate interest in creating a new entity. 3, investigate political will and priorities, of course. And number 4, budgetary considerations obviously will fall into this hybrid model. 5, fundraising opportunities. 6, programming needs. 7, public support, which we've obviously generated a lot already. And 8, the land use or zoning requirements that may come up during this time. And that is our recommendation. We've got loads of information in there for you, and we're open for questions.
Thank you. Good report, and really appreciate the summary that you provided. Questions? Jim.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian, for the presentation. Wanted to get a sense from the task force on something that really has come to my attention actually since the time I've been a commissioner, both from people within the city limits and people in the region, actually. And that's just the extent to which the Children's Museum and the Carnegie Center was really beloved by everybody. And I'm just wondering if something like that were recreated in the basement, that the task force necessarily wouldn't consider that in conflict or inconsistent with its recommendations?
Well, I can tell you certainly that the Children's Museum, among other options, other museum-type options, was I think fully discussed. And as a multi-use facility, arts, culture, history, heritage, and that type of thing, involving also theater, may be inconsistent with the recommendation, but I mean, we've got others here that can speak to that too.
I think the task force did consider that very carefully in more than one meeting. Frankly, museums are not very popular today. The only one that comes to mind that really is, and I don't even want to say flourishing, but still existing, is OMSI in Portland as a, quote, children's museum. There are just too many other opportunities for people to take their children or to take advantage of that. And so we did investigate and we did discuss it. Now, children's programming in this new center is something else, but an outright children's museum did not seem to be a viable choice, as popular as it was in the past.
You're probably more referring to static museum rather than something interactive like OMSI or.
I mean, you have to look at the space too. There's a limited space in the Carnegie. Right.
Okay. Thank you. Doug.
That actually goes to my point. Our museum, in fact, was an active participatory thing, and children were able to use things. What happened, though, when the renovation occurred to the basement, the space for the Children's Museum dramatically changed, and before, it really covered children, even a lot of elementary school children came. When it got reduced, actually the what was available for activities there got reduced as well, and it really became sort of a toddler's museum to a large extent. Commissioner Nocita perceives, and I do too, that is a needed component. And I think I talked about this before, that we do have more space, at least this time, that the library needs at least. We've got a library, we'll have a library, of course, children's library then, and I think that would be an ideal location for additional activities-based place for children. It didn't function as a museum in the static sense, just quite right. There were many things that the children could interact with there, and it was extremely popular. And I think there's still a need for that kind of facility. It may more appropriately be where we've got some more room for it. And I think the Carnegie is now limited in terms of the services I can provide. I don't know if I think Mr. Gosher was here prior to the renovation, but you may have gotten feedback on that issue yourself.
It was still the Children's Museum was still operating actually when I was.
Yes, but you weren't.
Not before the renovation.
Yeah, right, correct.
Okay, Rocky.
I have a lot of mixed feelings about this, but I think there was a lot of. I feel really confident that we had an excellent task force. I think that it included all the people we needed, and the part that I was disappointed with was the public outreach part, especially the open house. I wasn't really excited about that process. I think the answers actually have come back to us, probably do tell us what the public was thinking, but the process of how we came about that at that open house was bizarre. Just because you could put 50 stickers on one thing, it didn't really allow us to really compare answer A with B or option A with B. Someone liked one, they could put 15 stickers on one, and if they hated one, they could put 15 stickers on one they hated. And so it may have rated out to giving us the, good solutions, the bad solutions, but it really didn't give us an idea of what people truly were thinking. So that really bothered me. I'm a strong advocate for arts. So I'm not shocked to see that on the top of the list. This is something we have a great need for Oregon City, and that's because we lost the Carnegie Center, and that's what it was an art center. And so, to get that answer, that's not shocking because we know that. The city couldn't run it as an art center, and then we got a nonprofit to run it as an art center, and then we said, well, they're not running it the way we want them to run it, so we closed it. So I think that's not a surprise. So I'm glad to see that on the list. The one question I have is this little piece of the situation that we're in with the library, happened, and I felt really bad about how that happened right in the middle of this process, but there really wasn't, it was kind of like changing the rules of the game in the middle of the game, but we didn't have any other choice of what to do with the library complaint, so and it does give us time to kind of take this information and try to make a plan. And at least the Carnegie Center is being used. I mean, these are people in the Carnegie Center for the first time in a long time, so that's good. The one piece that I have a question about here that I really wanted to ask is because part of the reason that the library or using a piece of the Carnegie Center for the library became such a high priority on all these lists was because of the uncertainty of what was going to happen with the library to some degree. But it also falls back on the history of the building and what that building has always been. And so I find it strange a little bit, this one piece of the recommendation here where it says, let's see, where did I put it? It talks about, I have these all set out so I can be prepared for that.
Page 10.
I'm not sure. I had them all laid out there highlighted. Maybe my system doesn't work instead of... Okay, I know. I'm trying to find it. Where do you have it? Right there.
Is it this?
Oh, right here.
Okay.
Okay, the option of locating a portion or an element of the library was a popular potential use among attendees to the open house. However, in light of the library purchasing Eastham, this option is no longer feasible. I don't think so. It's not talking about the whole library. It's talking about a component of the library. If the top three alternatives or the top three options that people were coming back of said library use, mixed use, and art. Well, guess what? You have a mixed use center with a component of the library and the fine arts and all of that. So I think if using because people have talked about using it as maybe part of the history of the library, which ties into the cultural thing, maybe an art library that ties in with the arts component, that lends itself to the mixed use. It doesn't have to be a branch library, it doesn't have to be the entire library, but there is a huge community support for some type of libraries. Well, that's because that's what it's been historically. And so I've gone back and forth with my thoughts about the library, and before we even got into the discussion of what the library building or what the Carnegie building was going to be, my take on it was, well, we have an empty building. It's historically a library, so the library should have that building and use it for whatever they want it for. If they don't want to use the building, then we go through the process to decide what is it going to be, and that's kind of what we have done. So I've always thought that the library should have first pick of it, and that's at one period of time it was like, oh, well, we don't want it to be a library in any sense, and that's what kind of started the process. But I don't think that statement is too, I think, broad. You can still have a component. Maybe it's the bookstore. Maybe it's, I don't know. I'm just saying. But to say that the option is no longer feasible, that's not true. It could be part of this mixed use thing that we're talking about. I very strongly support the arts and culture idea The only concern that I have is, you know, how do we keep it alive? Because we haven't been successful at it. You know, we tried the city-operated center, didn't work. We tried nonprofit-operated center, and we didn't like how they were running it. I won't say that I didn't like how they were running it, but the city commission at the time didn't. So I think there's a lot of good stuff here. I think even though I don't think the open house process was helpful, I do think it got the answers that we needed. I just feel that there should have been a better effort made with the public piece, and the dot thing was just. I was looking at one piece of this survey, and it says one person out of the people that attended the open house thought that the open house was unhelpful. You want to guess who said that? I did. I thought it was horrible.
How strongly do you feel about that?
That's, you know, I put 50 red dots on it. That's how bad I feel about it. But, you know, the top three answers, you know, so I think, you know, it gives us, you know, a mixed use idea, and so I guess now we figure out how we make it work.
Real quickly, I'll just say two things. One, and I know that you know this, Mr. Smith, but I also know that I think you had anecdotal evidence of more than one dot going up on a topic. I personally did not, but I knew that conversation was going on, and it was seen. Each person was given specific direction as they entered the Carnegie Center to only put one dot next to an item. So anyway, that's just for the record. And number two, I think what you said too regarding the library would not be consistent with what we have recommended. Perhaps the wording there and the recommendation is, like you said, too general. The topic came up that, well, it is going to be about arts, culture, history. Is there an amount of books or a section of books that from the library that we would locate into the Carnegie Center that would supplement the activities that are going on in the Carnegie Center as this multi-use facility? I think the main discussion that we were having that resulted in that wording was a branch library, and perhaps we just chose the wrong wording. And I think that, unless somebody disagrees with me on the task force sitting here, I think that's pretty much sums it up.
Is there any disagreement from task force members you're seeing here?
I would like to speak just briefly about the process because we're a firm we've been in business 35 years. We've done this process and types of process. Each one is different so that we do tailor it to the city, the client, the project. It is internally validating, and that's very important, and that's what the task force realized. That the information we got from the online survey, the information we got from the open house, and most of the people were very honest. They don't play around. One or two, and you could spot them. So, you could reveal themselves, but it's not significant, really. And also the task force, I don't want to minimize that. And we had open meetings, and so people were always speaking to us from the public. The entire process was valid. And if you have a splendid group of citizens who spent hours on this and did their homework and came back, so that what you see here really, I think, as I say, it's internally validating for the process. Now, again, you are the policymakers, and you're the people who make the decision, but I think you can be very proud that they did what they were supposed to do, and they did it very well.
Okay, thank you. Doug?
Yes. You have a statement there that you need more than one staff member essentially to do this. And I can't argue that, but I think at the same time you need a manager, somebody that's responsible to whatever body, board or committee or whatever, is going to be working on these files, so you'd have to have an individual. If I were to look for some level of support the city might have other than facility availability, is being able to assist in some way for that manager position. And we've got budget issues and so forth, but we might be able to address those particular things at one point or another. And I don't think there was any implication that there wouldn't be a manager. But
We just didn't want to put the city staff on the spot, frankly. If Scott wants to volunteer.
That's fair. Well, I think you would want to find it. I would say you want to find it, have a professional manager.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any questions? Really appreciate your work. Thank you, Elaine, for your part in it. So. Okay, Commissioner, ready for a break? Okay, let's see. Come back at 1:45.
Pardon?
Okay, we are back in session now, and the next item on our agenda is to discuss the parking study and possible implementation schedule. So, Scott, are you going to do that?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Norris. Commissioners, this is on your agenda tonight so that we can, basically it was I think time or past time for staff to kind of revisit with the commission on this subject, and so I just wanted to basically kind of check in with you and see where we're at, seek some further direction so that
I think it's just the outside noise, so.
So, just wanted to, basically, this is kind of a check-in with the commission and get a sense and get some direction as to where you'd like us to go and prepare Lou to bring back to you for some further discussion as well. I know that you've got the study, or the report, I should say, that was resent to you, it was presented to you last year when it was completed. I believe you got an initial presentation from Rick Williams back in probably April, and then I think we had a revisitation where at the time the city manager and I both kind of just sort of touched base with you on a number of the items. So we've talked about it a couple of times, and those were both at work sessions like this.
Well, then there was one more piece. Because after a work session, we assigned the city manager and I and you to meet with the stakeholder groups to begin to negotiate and work out some of the issues contentious. So we held 5 meetings.
I believe so.
There were 5, and then oh, sure, you were there as well. Sorry. Is anyone else? I think we had. Anyway, we met with those groups, and then we compiled our notes. So I think what I see missing here is those notes, because, for instance, talking to the court, I think we came to some compromises that might work in implementation, and also our former city manager had a matrix of an implementation schedule, because I think it was if I remember, quite accurate, but I thought we had talked about picking the low-hanging fruit to work on pretty quickly, and I think there were some things on that we discussed with the Main Street stakeholder group that we wanted to work on. But anyway, I think there's maybe some that we may be farther along than just the study.
Right. Yeah,
because of that work.
Very, very good point. I could compile that information that you're talking about, the follow-up meetings that were requested. But I think you said there were some compromises made and so forth, but essentially I think there was still support going forward.
Oh, absolutely.
So
yeah, no, I don't disagree with that.
One of the things that I wanted to visit with you about a little bit is that You know, and this may or may not be an issue with you, but the plan has never been formally adopted. It's been talked about, it's been presented, it's been received, I guess is how I would say it. But the commission has never made any kind of formal statement of definite, you know, we've adopted this or we accept the plan or whatever. I think there's been obviously the follow-up discussion, and Mayor, you're talking about the follow-up conversations we had, and I think that was important. So I guess part of the question tonight is there any desire for the commission to have this as a formally adopted type of a plan? I mean, that's kind of the typical process, is that, you know, by a resolution or some other form of action, you would accept the plan and formally adopt it. That would give the staff at least the sense or the authority or whatever you want to say to take, like you said, whether we go forward with some of the steps to begin with, the low-hanging fruit, and begin working through the process of implementation. I think that's where we sort of stalled out is, and there were some other reasons I think why we've delayed in bringing it back to you. But at this point, there are really no other reasons for delaying this anymore. I think it's time to begin that. So that's one of the questions I wanted to pose to you is whether you have the desire to do that, or if you feel that we've already, in essence, you've received the plan and that's what we've already expected. I'm not quite sure where we're at on that particular.
A couple of questions. You just mentioned there were a couple of other reasons for delay. What were those other reasons?
I think just work plans, roads, other priorities. I think, frankly, the city manager transition had something to do with it. There was just a gap of, I think there were just a few things. Probably more than anything, just, I think, at least I'll speak from my position, just workload and priorities. There's a lot going on, and it's time to get, and positive pressure from the downtown folks saying, hey, don't forget we need to do this, and things like that. It just kind of prompted it to be, let's start talking about this again.
Okay. The other question I had is probably both for Scott and for Alice. Was it out of that subsequent stakeholder follow-up, did anything get raised that would require perhaps an amendment to the plan, or maybe some resolution, some acknowledgement of, or an addendum that would acknowledge any concerns while still allowing us to adopt a resolution in favor of it in order to move forward? Because if not, I mean, if we can accommodate the concerns, I'd really like to put this on the next agenda for formal adoption.
Just if I would hang on to that, I would really appreciate, I think, that suggestion that become an addendum or an attached object or something, because I hate to lose those notes. We discussed elevator hours, and I don't know if I don't think anything was inconsistent with the report. It's just some detail. We might as well not lose it.
And to me, I think the stakeholder that I recall having the most concern was the court.
Yeah.
So can you enlighten us on what those concerns were in the discussions?
Well, that's where I need to. I remember some of them, but if you have those notes.
We'll have to go back, I think.
Yeah.
We'll go back and we'll pull up what we've got. I was not actually at the meeting with the courthouse. I missed that one. So
I was. I'm sure Terry remembers too. The big concern, as I think we discussed subsequently, was that the court talked to us about their security system right across from the verdict, and they absolutely did not wish to have that security barrier violated by parking there. And so with the court, we discussed what their options were for some additional parking in various pockets around the courthouse. We also discussed parking up on the hill for sheriffs. So they were, I believe at the time, they were doing some reprocessing and refiguring some of the judges' parking. But that's where we really learned about how the court security works and how that was a non-starter.
Yeah. Okay. I should probably raise an issue that we now also have the circulation study as well.
Right.
And I guess it would probably be a good idea to discuss how these two interface.
Yeah.
Any discussion of
We
that?
talked about that, and that was kind of went back and forth. Talked to Nancy Crushart and the city manager, and I had some of these conversations, and we were initially. That was also, I forgot, that was one of the reasons for the delay. That was a big one, and I just remember that. Thank you. That had come up at some point, and then we sort of said, well, maybe we should try to wait and see if we can integrate, which we would still somehow try to work through that anyway. But as that process has unfolded, and Nancy, please correct me if I'm wrong here, but the process for that circulation plan has been, the timeline has kind of moved out a little further, and we were going to try to wait and bring it back at the same time, but we kind of said, why don't we just try to at least tackle this parking plan in terms of getting it back in front of the commission, getting it moving forward, and then as the circulation plan unfolds, we'll still bring those things together eventually, but it's going to be a little bit longer, as I understand. So.
The schedule on the circulation plan right now is to have a final recommendation for the city commission to review in October. We wanted to enable this commission to look at that because you've all been involved in it from the day one. And we've started all the meetings with stakeholders and agencies and ODOT, et cetera. And I don't think that, I think that the parking study and the circulation study will come together fine. I don't think there's any problems with inching either one of them forward. I think it'll all come together in the long run.
That's all I have, but maybe we could invite our downtown manager to speak at some point during this.
I think there's a citizen here that would like to speak to it too, so I suggest that. No, I don't think it is. In any case, I'm on. Yes?
You are?
Okay. I don't know why I didn't catch this the first time. The one piece that's here, and I've got a suggestion for it, but it doesn't seem to be here. There's a real tie-in to the use of the above bluff area to the downtown area. When I refer to the bluff, the only time we talked about peak hours corresponding to quality scheduling. This survey was taken during the summer, of course. And I don't see any strong tie-in to the bluff use in terms of how many of the people parking there, in fact, going down the elevator using downtown services. I was going to make a suggestion which you might be able to look at internally without a whole lot of effort. And I'm going to suggest the 9 to 4 block for it. Because before 9, you've got a lot of people that live up in the bluff area that go down to use the buses as part of the transit system, and after 4, that's also true. If you look at between 9 and 4 o'clock, look at the peak use of the elevator during that period of time, look at the peak use of the parking on the hill during that period of time. See if there's a relation between the two. One thing I thought was kind of interesting looking at the report was that our 2-hour designated parking down on Main Street, its average occupancy is roughly an hour and a half. The 2-hour utilization on the bluff is 2 hours. And of course, that was roughly to a meeting. That means probably 50% of the people are actually there longer than they're supposed to be. But the bluff users are also involved in some foot traffic trying to access the downtown area. And it might be that if we've got a feeling that there are a substantive number of people that are using the 2-hour bluff parking to go downtown, that we might want to extend the time period there on the bluff a little bit more to accommodate the fact that they're involved in some foot travel time to get to their particular designation. I think one way to look at it is to look at the peak use of the library here at that period of time. Of course, maybe it's the library hours too now. But the peak use of the elevator time between 9 and 4, and perhaps if you could break it out that far, the peak use of the 2-hour parking on the bluff at that period of time, see if there's a positive relationship.
One of the stakeholder groups that we met with was the sheriff's department. I don't know who was at that meeting, and they didn't actually were aware that the block parking was actually available, and they often sit on Main Street for an 8-hour day or something like that. And so,
Those hours of coffee shop.
yeah, and so he pointed out how close it is to park on the bluff and not take up downtown parking just waiting to be called. That was kind of an interesting revelation, but that sort of speaks to what you're talking about too. But I believe we had some recommendations of trying to match lot use with the city being part of a negotiator to match need with available space. And that,
There's been some of that that's already happened because of that, so even that's a good byproduct of those discussions.
but definitely.
Well, I'm glad to hear what my colleagues had to say. I'm ready to move forward with this. It's my understanding now we've missed 3 cycles of parking fees of changing them as this study had recommended, and and that we need to move forward on it. And I also was going to tell everyone, I have meeting 1, 2, and 3, all the notes here, but I don't have the presiding judge and the chair. So if anybody's looking for them, I have a copy here. So I'd like to see this put on the agenda for the next next city commission meeting, and then as we just be receptive and to mitigate concerns with neighbors and how move forward on implementing it and then mitigating things as they come up. But we need to start on this.
Yeah, I agree. Rocky?
When this first came to us, the only concern I had was that the Oregon City Police Department wasn't a stakeholder, and so I think was one of the subsequent meetings with Oregon City Police Department, and has the police department reviewed this?
We reviewed it. We have not been really a part of the discussion.
That's unbelievable.
I think yes, we had.
I mean, that's something I brought up when we first got this. I mean, how?
No. At the law enforcement group, I believe that you had 2 officers.
Multiple people.
OCPD, Jim Van, Chris Taylor.
On follow-up meeting, not a part of the original. Not a part of the original. Okay, so I mean, I don't want to move forward on unless the police department supports it. So that's my only.
Do you want to comment?
But I want to move forward on it soon.
I think that the situation is there's no easy answers down there.
Right.
And I think the police department has kind of taken the situation under control by bringing a couple places down there, which has worked out really good for us for a minimal cost. So we do support the plan. The police department does. Like I said, there are no easy answers. I understand the sheriff's office concern and the judge's concern down there, but I think this is the best thing we could do under the circumstances.
Yeah, well, a couple of things, and they're kind of related to each other. First, the concern about how this relates to the circulation study in fact, that was one of the concerns that I had early on when I first heard about the study. And but I would say that I think that there's no problem whatsoever with the council going forward with the adoption of this study, because the integration, if you will, can happen as a matter of implementation. And tonight and at the next meeting, you'll be adopting a policy that we're going to have this plan and we're going to execute it. The execution part is sort of the staff role, and some of the details that you talked about tonight and how those interact with the various stakeholders are things that normally the staff would work out in the implementation phase. Doesn't mean there's not going to be bumps, because there will be. They may some of those that are affected by the bumps may want to drag commissioners into the execution phase and execution of the study. I'll use the word implementation. Yeah, that didn't come off right. That's almost as bad as the West Wing grid. Not quite, though. Not quite. But I do want to say that a lot of these details can be worked out in the implementation phase of this, and also when you mentioned the low-hanging fruit or the easier parts of it to implement, we can sort of begin working on those even as we proceed toward eventual adoption of the circulation study, particularly those parts that we think are sort of going to be consistent with whatever the circulation study is. And we do have some preliminary information about that. So, but I think this is great. I'm glad we're going to be moving forward because I've had a few questions about it from downtown business owners myself, and I think it'd be great to get it further.
Thank you, Daphne. Oh, okay. Vicky Yates, we don't normally have citizens speak during a work session. Do you have something that you need to say?
Yes, I see Oregon City. Just a couple of comments on the parking study. I was on that task force, and and as a lawyer, one of the concerns that the legal community had was that there is no drop-off place for lawyers to drop off boxes of documents, and that was a big concern.
For the courthouse?
For the courthouse. Just last time on First Friday, we were walking down the street, and we saw these two lawyers walking from the courthouse, basically oblivious to the fact that their poor female clerk would have a giant hand cart with huge boxes, and she couldn't even breathe. She was pushing it down the street, and that kind of thing has to be avoided. If you can have at least one parking spot where somebody can pull their car in to load and unload, that would be really helpful.
I'm not sure that was a concern about parking or employee-employer relationship.
Yeah. And the other thing, I, as a stakeholder, as someone who lives on the bluff near the elevator, I'm happy to report that although I wanted to see the elevator hours only till 9, and I know you said it at 9:30, hasn't been a problem with parking or anything else to date, so that's working out fine. But my neighbors and I are concerned that there could be problems with parking on the bluff if the downtown parkers are pushed up the hill. And one thing that we stressed during the task force was that if there is going to be more parking up the hill, enforcement of the 2-hour limit really has to be increased. And obviously that won't happen after hours, and if there's a problem, we will let you know. But please bear.
We're hoping.
Yeah, we're hoping it won't be a problem, but let me know. That's all.
Thank you, Vicky. Okay.
Well, I think Bill Daniels probably, he didn't sign up anything, but since we opened it up, and I'd like to also hear Mr. Purdy.
Well, you didn't have to say. Which is unusual, of course.
Yeah, as you know, I live in that impacted area on top of the bluff, and of course, I think that, and talking with Nancy Bush earlier today, and I've talked to her in the past as well, and she's understaffed, and we know that. We also know that with the adoption of this parking plan, that in the city, the growth of the city, that a lot of that parking is going to be, as it should be, put up on the top of the bluff. But we do need an additional enforcement officer. So I want that to be part of our discussion, whether it's through raising the meter fees, doubling the fees, for example, raising the fines, parking fines. Some people think that $10 a day is fine with them to park all day in front of my driveway. So I think that there's some issues that we can do to make sure that we get to the worst of the soft law, shall we call them, so it hurts it, and we can at the same time make it revenue neutral by having that pay for an additional enforcement officer. And I also would like to also mention about with the increase in traffic, and certainly City Hall has added to some of that as well, that we step up, maybe have a priority about painting up here on the parking spaces to delineate the obvious places where they can and cannot park, the yellow curves as well, crosswalks delineated better, and certainly sight lines for some of these parking areas, and the commission has addressed one of those right here in front of City Hall where block particular automobiles, certainly the larger ones, block the view, the sight lines of pedestrians. So those are the kind of things I'm interested in working with the commission on a future effort. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Okay, so we'll see this at our next meeting likely for official adoption.
Thank you.
Thank you, staff. Oops. Next, we're going to be considering changes to our business license regulations, which will address bingo, lotto, and other social games. So, Chief, are you presenting this?
Yeah,
Okay.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, City Commissioner. If you remember back in February, there was a request from a local business to amend the city code dealing with social gaming to allow that in private businesses, and the commission was pretty emphatic that they did not wish to continue on with that. However, as a result of that conversation, we found out that the way our current code is written, it doesn't necessarily or does not comply with state law. State law basically says that if we do allow, if local governments do allow social gaming, the city may prohibit bingo and lotto, but they cannot regulate it or license it. And in addition, we've had quite a few requests from charitable, fraternal, and religious organizations to hold benefit poker games to raise money for their particular interest. Some of those have been the wrestling team at a high school and some other charitable organizations. The trouble is the way that the current code is written, you can only apply for license that would work at the place that you have your business. In other words, the high school wanted to hold a charitable game or charitable poker game for raising money for the wrestling team, you'll only be able to hold it at the high school and maybe not at a local coffee shop or a local restaurant. And this suggested amendments to the ordinance would allow those types of organizations to have those events at private businesses or private homes. And in addition, it eliminates any type of talk about regulating bingo or lotto as state law stipulates.
So you're recommending that we make these changes to parallel the state regs?
I would, and the other thing, like I said before, is the social gaming to allow those charitable organizations, charitable, fraternal, or religious organizations, to hold those type of benefit fundraisers for the organizations with more flexibility. It wouldn't necessarily have to be at their present business or their establishment.
Okay, Kathy?
So just to clarify, so does it expand any gaming or social games, bingo, lotto? Does it expand any uses that we aren't doing, or is this just allowing some of the uses that we have to be off-site?
It allows those uses to be outside. It doesn't say them.
Doug?
Yes. I guess my question is here, whether this ordinance would prohibit compensation to the commercial entity that's having games.
It says that it will not allow House to earn any money. All the money has to go to those organizations.
But the wrestling club could.
The wrestling club does. The organization in which it's being held at would not.
Right. Yeah. But the wrestling club could hold it at Weatherford.
Yes.
Yeah, so I got it.
Any other questions on this one? All right, good to see it in another form later. Thank you. Next, on the agenda is hello to talk about what's going on with the library and the contract.
Thank you, Mayor Norris and Commissioners. When I put this on the agenda a few weeks ago, as you know, we're supposed to be psychic and kind of know what's going to happen 2 weeks in the future when we write these reports. I was hoping that I would have great news for you and that I would be able to announce that our due diligence period has started and the documents have been finalized. But I heard from our attorney yesterday, and he assured me that we are on the final revisions, very, very slight revisions to the promissory note and the deed of trust that are attached to the sales contract, and that he is doing his very best to get those signed by the end of the week. So once that does happen, we start our due diligence period, and we have been busy during this time, not just moving, but also like lining up some contractors for the inspections that need to happen during the due diligence and starting to look at the rezoning issues as well. So I just knew you missed having the library in front of you, so I thought I'd put my face out here for you.
It's been a long time.
It's been a long, dry spell, I know.
May I ask, with the concurrence of commissioners, that you give a brief update at what's going on at our temporary library site?
Sure.
Maybe at the negotiation meeting rather than
Oh, I'd be happy to next week.
here so that our public can
absolutely
see that.
Be happy to.
I know you're not prepared, public. Anything else to elaborate?
Yes.
Oh, Doug. Sorry.
There's some discussions whether we're going to have another commission meeting this month or not, but I think we should hold one just so you can give us positive information next week.
Well, I can give you some positive information tonight if you like. I mean,
what your information was.
well, about the use at the Carnegie and stuff.
Well, I was talking about the other thing.
Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah, next week. Yeah. Well, I'll email you guys.
You can send us an email.
I'll send you an email.
You can send us an email.
Okay, thank you. City manager's report. David.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Couple of things I have tonight. First of all, before it gets too far away from the recent topic, the parking study, I want to make a suggestion, a policy-wide suggestion, to try to get for the city and the commission a bit more mileage out of that study. I've seen these come before commissions before and they get adopted, and there's all this groundswell of work and committee and everything else legal that's gone into it. And after the implementation begins, fairly quickly the fees become inconsistent with the inflation, and the next thing you know, you're back there doing the study again. So to get more mileage out, if I can use that word mileage, with the parking study, I think you'd be well served if you considered indexing that to, or at least the philosophy of indexing your fee schedule for parking with inflation so that we can get a little bit more lifespan out of the study and all the work you put in. So if you want us to look at that, we can, when we put the final fee schedule together for the implementation, we can try to incorporate that into some ordinance. It'd have to be an ordinance that you would adopt. And you've probably done that, I think, on other things, other rates that you've set. You've indexed them to inflation so you don't have to keep doing it over and over. And I don't know that that's in the study. I don't think it is. So that might be something for us to try to work on if you're interested in that. And if you're not interested, we don't have to. But if you are, we'll.
That's actually in the implementation. So, yeah.
Well, at some point it has to be part of the adoption because it has to be a legal act by the commission whether to index to inflation. You can't index to half cent, for example, on a quarter parking space. But we could construct a fee schedule that allows us the flexibility to go in and adjust the rates with inflation if there's an increase.
You're going to have to put in penny meters?
No. We would do it in a way that's definitely efficient and effective. And I think eventually we hope to move to some sort of electronic metering like they have in some of the larger neighboring cities because it's just more effective and cost efficient. So if there's any, maybe I should ask it a different way. Does anyone object to us working on an inflation-based? Okay, please, thank you. Next, I want to ask you about the July 21st meeting. We only have a couple of agenda items scheduled for that. We did add some more tonight, but it looks like you've got a really strong opportunity to condense that meeting into your first meeting, which is August 4th, your first meeting in August. So trying to follow that last pattern. Does anybody have an objection if we condense the meeting in with August?
If this call sends us a positive email.
Okay. And I know sometimes it's a little longer gap than you're used to, so please, if any of you have questions about anything that's happening in the city between then, without that meeting, we've kind of touched base at that meeting, but if you have questions, please email me, call me, get a hold of me, and I'll try to answer it for you.
Thank you for the gift of time.
Yes,
thank you.
Let me see here. I know I'm missing something. Oh, I also wanted to ask, since there's been a lot of talk about the Carnegie Fountain. And I actually, at the suggestion of one of our commissioners, went over there and looked at the fountain today and walked around on the surface, dry as a bone, with my equally dry wingtip shoes, and found it somewhat precarious angle of that. But I know that Scott has looked at that in more detail and talked to our insurance carrier about it. And really, the insurance claim and the hazards from that is what's, I think, really driving our concern. So if any of you have, Scott's ready to talk about that and share the latest, greatest information about it, if you'd like to hear from him.
Sure.
Thank you. Well, I think each of you hopefully received an email from me yesterday that detailed the why and the when and so forth. And first of all, I'd like to express that I'm disappointed that we had to make this decision at the time that we did, and it was unfortunate, and it wasn't certainly our intention to do that. Having said that, a big part of our responsibility as staff is to, even though I know a lot of people don't like to hear this because it sounds kind of governmental or whatever, but we have to manage the risk for the city. That's a big part of what we do, because if something happens that puts us in a bad position risk-wise, usually they're going to look at the staff and say, why didn't you, or what were you aware of, did you know? And in this particular case, the bottom line is, as unfortunate as the timing is and so on and so forth, and we can talk about some other reasons why that happened, we are on notice because we've had some incidents happen that called it to our attention, that created the situation that said we need to ask we have city pays for risk management services as part of our insurance package, and that's an important piece of what we do as operating our facilities and all the things that we do. And we do from time to time have things like this come up and we say, this is a situation that probably warrants asking them to take a look, and that's really what happened. And so the bottom line is that they've done a very thorough analysis, and in their opinion, they believe that we do have a situation that warrants not opening that to the public until we fix the problem. And the challenge in that is that fixing the problem really requires probably a few months worth of work. And unless there's any opposition to that, which I'm sure there is not, we do plan to go forth on that as soon as we possibly can, with every intention of opening that by next season. You know, it's a relatively simple project, but it still takes some planning, some construction drawings, permitting, HRB review, bidding, and then construction. So it'll take a little bit of time. We're prepared to go forth and do that as soon as we possibly can, but unfortunately we're at July, whatever today is, 12th, 13th, and so we're kind of missing that summer window. We could look at some temporary solutions. They would be probably expensive, and I don't know how quickly we could even accommodate those and whether they're even fully possible. But that's something that we could investigate, but I really don't think that those have a lot of possibility of providing the opportunity to still open that for the summer. And the other option is, with the Commission's direction, you can certainly direct us to open the facility for the summer. We could turn on it's not a matter of there's any problem with the operating system, it's the surfacing, it's the sloped angle. Really what you have to do with modernization of transforming old wading pools into spray parks is something that you're seeing communities do all over the place, especially in Oregon, because the rules have changed for the Department of Health and Safety. The EHS rules have changed the game for how we operate old wading pools, and that's why you see so many of them turning into spray parks, like we did, I think, very successfully at Rivercrest. You see the results of that. But basically, the two big problems with the surfacing are, one is it's just the wear of the surfacing. It's degraded to the point where it's failing badly. It's the original concrete, and it's only got a lifespan of so many years. We exceeded that many years ago. But the other issue is the entry point into that. It's the old wading pool entry into the flat bottom, but it's getting into that. That's where the slipping is happening. It's at a pretty good pitch. That's what David Frazier was just talking about, was just getting down. And when you add to that the level of failure of the surfacing, that's where our problem is. So really what we have to do is we have to flatten that whole surface and put a new surface on it, and that's the solution. It's doable. It just takes some money, but we're prepared to go forward and do that. But we would be, if we did anything different to open that without changing any of those issues, we'd be doing that clearly against the recommendation of our risk manager, of our insurance carrier, and that does put us into some situations that I frankly recommend that we don't put ourselves into. But so that's where we're at. I'd be happy to answer any other questions. Again, I apologize for being in this situation, although it's not entirely something that staff, we clearly didn't want to be. I think part of this as well is just, this is a good representation of where we're at with some serious deferred maintenance issues that we've talked about. We've talked about in the budget committee situations, and we've talked about with the city commission and other discussions. And so this is probably one of the better examples I can give you, and it wasn't intended to be a good example. We didn't intend for this to happen, but it is a good example of where we're at with the deferred maintenance, and I think that's why it's important that we have that continued conversation about how do we resolve, because this is one glaring example right now because of the season that we're in and when it happened. But we've got a number of other things like this that we're in the position of old facilities, old infrastructure failing, and we haven't got a great financial plan for that right now. So we'd really like to solve that. We'd like to bring a solution forward. So we've been talking about that, and we've talked about it recently at the budget committee with a parks utility fee of some type of hopefully bringing a solution forward to you. But anyway, I didn't mean to get off topic completely, but I think it's an important part of this discussion that it's a good example. So.
Thank you. Questions, Jim?
Yeah, I have a couple of suggestions actually. One is a request. Scott, could you actually email? I'd be interested in, and perhaps my colleagues would also be able to see the actual recommendation that the insurance risk manager sent the city. Is it CCIS? Is that the name of the organization?
City County Insurance.
Yeah, I'd be interested in seeing that. Just
we'll send that.
How they operate. And actually that jogged my memory because I'd been meaning to suggest this as a future agenda item, but it continually slips my mind. I'm wondering if my colleagues would be interested at some point, maybe not next month, but maybe sometime early this fall, of having a work session item inviting CCIS to chat with us about how they operate. And I've kind of been hearing about this group and its agency, and it seems to be very important, but kind of operating, lurking in the shadows, and I don't know much about how they operate, but it seems to be a very important agency to us. So I'd like to, have a work session with them. So I'll show that out there too. And my last suggestion, actually, I'm wondering if we reach, the end of the natural lifespan of this Strait Park Basin, I'm wondering if we could use it as an opportunity to kind of rethink that amenity. And I'd recommend folks pay a visit in the Pearl District to Jameson Square. If folks are familiar with that, I'd really recommend it on a hot summer's day. It's a fountain. It falls over some blocks, and it is teeming with kids. It's fun, and it's a very shallow pool, and it's an attraction. People come from out of town because it's so fun. Yeah, and as far as drawing, folks to Oregon City, to the McLaughlin District and some of the businesses around here, if we could rethink this whole Strait Park, on that square, something as with that kind of fun and pizzazz to it, and becoming a regional attraction. I think that would be really neat. So I'm just going to throw out whether we might be able to, take advantage of this transition to kind of, rethink that feature.
Doug?
Yeah, it's a great idea. I guess my concern would be, if you're talking about a new design, a new waiting pool, my guess is you wouldn't be able to put that in a year's time. Commissioner Nocita pointed out what he heard there at Algerson Park. I had 4 people come up to me about that same issue. I would suggest there may be many people that have children that use that park. I'm not aware we have other waiting pools in the city. I would suggest that you post the addresses of the other waiting pools, the water facilities that we have for children.
We've done that.
That is it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we've let in good public outreach at the moment. If people are tuned in, that those other places are at the Oregon City swimming pool. We have the outdoor waiting pool, which is open free of charge for the summer.
That's at 12th and
Jackson. Yep. And then the Rivercrest Spray Park is open, and that's on Park Drive up on the hilltop in the Rivercrest neighborhood. So we do have 2 other alternate options. Thank you for reminding me of that, because I also meant to include that in my report, and I forgot to do so.
Yeah, I guess coming back to Commissioner Maceda's question is, I think it's a great idea. I'd like to know what the cost of making a fix on this is. And if we'll consider that, if the cost is so much, and if the commission's going to make a decision to, and money can be identified to go to a much better facility, whether we leave it closed for 2 years and let people know or something like that, that's my concern. It's kind of like, revamping a city hall into a police station and then want to put forward a new facility, and then, things like that don't necessarily work very well. And so, I want you to give that some thought.
I think I can, if you'd like to hear a response right now, I can give you a little bit of a piece of that answer. Right? It would take some further investigation, but we've looked at the fix that I was talking about, which is just basically kind of leveling and putting a new surface and not doing any significant enhancement like you're talking about, Commissioner Nacia. Although I think that would be great. I mean, I think that would be a wonderful amenity, but the cost is around $25,000 to do what I was talking about. If we get into doing some expanded thinking, I can't tell you what that would be, but I can tell you it'd be many tens of thousands more, I would guess. And also there is the time element. So, because the plan to do what would be the relatively easy fix would be pretty straightforward, but then we'd be getting into some, I think, lengthier design processes. And I do want to, there's one more issue to kind of throw into this a little bit for consideration. That's the historic considerations with, that any kind of design has to go through the Historic Review Board. And I don't.
Oh, that's okay. They'll approve anything.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know what that means exactly in terms of what challenges that could present, but I think anything that we do that would deter much from the type of facility that we have now might lengthen the discussion a little bit more. To say, but at any rate, if the commission would like us to go that route, we could certainly explore those options. It would be good to know where you want us to go with that.
I believe that the Regional Arts and Culture Council was involved when Jameson Square was created, and so in my mind, to have that be part of the rollout of the parks fee or something, but I'd really like to see that vetted by the citizens as well, since it's exists in the heart of the neighborhood, and certainly coming from I'd like to see our advisory committee involved in what a future recommendation might be, but to be able to create a signature piece there, I think could be a really wonderful idea, but where it falls, I think, on the priority list would rub right up against our parks maintenance fee as well. So I'd like to kind of see that discussed as a whole package. And what are the, I think the parks master plan puts out the priorities of what we already have said are the priorities, so we kind of need to figure out where that should be inserted in there. But that's a very cool idea.
Still my reports, technically.
Oh, just a second. There's one. Yeah, you're still on the report.
And on this issue, I know the commission. There is some. I think on one of our future agendas, we're planning on bringing back to you the discussion about how you wanted to appropriate the interest from the South Fork Water Board loan. So there's that possibility, and if this repair project turns into a larger project, as you're contemplating with this discussion, then that would be a potential source of revenue as well to consider.
Rocky?
Actually, I can withdraw that. I was just asking about science being posted, which sounds like it's done. Good.
I only have one thing left.
Okay, great.
If I might, I have thought of another agenda item, if I might, for not the study session of the city commission.
Well, let's wait. After this, let's wait for his report to be completed. No, we're on the commission.
Did you say this?
No.
Thank you. Well, the last item is, I think in the early, beginning of the meeting, one of the commissioners asked about the sexual harassment lawsuit, and so I wanted to provide you an update about what I know on that. Our insurance attorneys have asked us to cooperate with them in investigating further. These recent developments about the access of the personal email is something that I learned of late last Friday. And so as soon as we learned of it, I made the decision to authorize HR to put the employee on leave until we could investigate further and find out what else, if anything else, we don't know. Also to find out some of the extent, how many times it was accessed, and some of those details. And so our attorneys are investigating that now. We're helping with that. And until I have more information to share, I just don't have very much more to tell you because I don't know very much more. They have filed an amended complaint that also brings in the violation of privacy and some of the other 1983 claims that at least one of you are familiar with, I think. So it's an amended complaint. The city attorney's office isn't handling it. CCIS is handling it, and so as an insurance claim, they're the lead, and we're kind of taking their advice on how to deal with it. But the employee the supervisor will remain on leave until we have this resolved one way or the other.
Does anyone need any additional information on this?
Well, I also will tell you that I'm planning to keep you updated with emails as I learn more. But in this case, cases like this, through the discovery process, the information tends to sort of dribble in, if you will, in little increments. And so when it does, I'll try to keep you updated as much as possible. If at any point you want to have an executive session about something like this, again, because it's an insurance claim, you probably don't need to be involved in managing the litigation. That's part of what we pay them for. But I certainly want to make sure that you're as informed as possible about it all. So anytime you have questions in between my updates, please let me know and I'll get information to you. That's all I have in my report.
Thank you. And then we just have one other item on the agenda. So Doug, why don't you slip in before we go to Linda?
One I wanted to put forward is we all know we had two appeals on Atkinson Memorial Church extension of their educational facility. The first appeal resulted in the commission remanding the decision back to the Historic Review Board. And I would like the commission to consider waiving part or all the fee for that particular appeal. The second one, of course, we rejected, and I'm not talking about that, but I think when we have an appeal coming before us, if the commission finds as merit and acts on it, so consideration of that nature should be put forward, recommended for agenda.
So waiving the appeal waiving the fee for the first appeal that we sustained.
That we returned.
We remember. Yes. Part or all.
David?
I have a rookie question, or an observation, if you will. Generally, I always try to advise city commissions that I work for to attempt in all respects to treat similarly situated persons similarly. So I don't know your history here, if you've had a history of waiving those kinds of fees for other folks and under what conditions.
Well, only once.
But whatever that is, I would encourage you to be consistent. So if you have an ordinance or you have a policy that you charge the fee, unless there's some compelling reason that makes this a distinction from others, you may want to just think about trying to be as consistent as possible. I don't know what it is, and I'm hoping to talk to all of you about it.
Let's ask, are there commissioners that wish to consider this further meeting?
I don't have an opinion.
Right.
I think the attorney is going at me, but this would be the point of the commission meeting.
It is a commission meeting issue, and we shouldn't do it tonight.
Yeah.
I want to get a staff report.
Well, but I'm trying to get a sense of history. We have three head nods to take it to that level.
Not mine.
I would be interested as well.
Yeah, I don't think I am. So therefore, it doesn't go forward. We need 3 votes for that. So the last item on our agenda is the legislative agenda that we were sent in May of 2027 for tonight. This is an opportunity for us to select, along with all the other cities in the state, 4 priorities for that for us. Does staff have recommendations on that? So the ones that certainly, I have more than 4, but I've got some to look at. The continuing conflict between the transportation planning rule and statewide land use planning goals we've discussed quite a few times, and that to me is a really important one. It's listed twice under both transportation and community development. It's number D. Under human resources, so HIM one, would be P, to allow employees to choose alternative retirement option and protect the integrity and stability of PERS. I don't know if you have a comment on that. That's is that something that would benefit the city?
I don't have a comment on it, but I'll review it and
it has to be done tonight. Yeah, I would hope to send it in 2 more days or something like that. It's not.
Mayor, if you're looking for
suggestions. Yeah. Well, I think if that doesn't appear to be a priority for you off the top of your head, then that is enough for me. Yeah. Okay. Let's eliminate that one. David, did you have something?
Well, there's always been a priority for me is to contain healthcare costs as a budget officer. So that's a big one under HR. It's item O under the human resources one. So if you're just looking for suggestions, certainly contain healthcare costs.
Yeah, the others that I'm very much interested in are under under transportation. The transportation planning rule, and then W, to seek additional funding efficiencies and program support for multimodal transit and rail projects. I think that's a pretty key thing. Nancy, would you concur with that? Okay, so W is a biggie. And then I like all of them on wastewater, particularly the last 2, AA and BB. One of the issues is we've lost state funding for infrastructure. We really have received way less state funding for infrastructure. So I don't know if that's a reality, but it's certainly a huge need. Anything about that. And then B, as we're working with South Fork, protecting our water rights, use them or lose them, I think is a big issue, and I see one of our water rights issues. People raising over it. But so those are important to me, and then I like F and G under finance and taxation because especially F, I would really like to see an overhauled property tax system. I don't know if it's reality.
Probably spoken to.
Been on the list for a long time. And then G, I guess the reason I would recommend G, that it seems like ho-hum because League of Oregon Cities always protects the state revenue funding because that's where, under this next session, there are going to be very few possible money that's sacred, I believe. And so it seems to me that would be a good self-interest to try to protect our revenue streams. That's a pretty hefty trend that comes to us. So those are my recommendations. If you want to tell me which 4 you like, is someone else? Oh, gee.
Yes, I'd like to at least bring the Commission's attention to J, which is keeping funding for the Department of Public Safety Standards and Training. That is very important and near and dear to my heart. I think it's important for the public safety of local communities. It keeps funding for juvenile. It keeps funding for corrections. It keeps funding for safe police and forensics labs, which is important in securing criminal convictions of the people incarcerated. So I think it's very, very important that we at least try to address that somewhere down the line in the legislature.
Has it been chopped recently too? It says further cuts. So.
It's been ordered like other state agencies to.
The 10% that they're back to work. Okay. Let's just quickly go through and see, I mean, this is not scientific, we will lobby for a lot of them, but this is just for priorities for elders, so I don't really want to waste time on it, but, the transportation label, so, D, there's support for D. I guess raise your hand so I can see if there's support for D. Okay, we got support for D, so that's one of them. The overhaul of the state property tax system, I guess you can vote 4 times. All right. On D. I got 4 votes on D.
Oh, okay.
But maybe 5, but 4 was fine.
I might take my back off.
Okay, F, G. Yeah, that's the nature of revenue. J, the one suggested by the chief. Raise your hand if you like.
That's not J there.
It's J. It's general government, J.
Is that it? Yes. Okay, I vote for that one.
Okay. That's number 2. And then.
Yeah, go back, you said overall the state property tax.
State property tax system.
Where does it count?
Good luck. My count was no one on that.
Oh, okay.
Zip. Nada. Okay. Then, O, the work to achieve healthcare cost containment, local decision-making authority and benefit design.
I think I'm an O.
There's 2 for O. Jim, is that something we can have influence in? That's what I found.
Work to achieve healthcare cost containment,
Yeah, I thought it sounded a little.
That's a little wish to make, because it's really in the hands of the health insurance companies for the most part.
Okay.
And so, healthcare reform.
Okay, then, W was more funding additions and programs for multiple transit and rail projects. There are votes for that? I think, well, I'm gonna put 3 on there because I'm not sure how I'm putting wastewater, AA, and, let's see,
Well, double A.
and double B. Double B. Okay, we got double B. So that is, okay, 1, 2, I have 3. So the second vote getter was the additional funding for rail and transit. Is that okay, Carport?
Yes.
Okay, we're done.
What was that letter?
That is W. So the 4 have, sorry, been wrong. D, J, W, and E. Would you be responsible for saying something? I will. Thank you very much. Okay, good. So this is the East County Reports and TV. We are adjourned.